Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Kason Morris Learnings. I am Kason Morris, and we have this show, Kason Morris Learnings, where we talk about everything related to life, work, and legacy. And we're on episode number 7, I think. So I appreciate everyone who has joined thus far as we discussed various topics. And I am also joined by my co host and producer. Christopher Fernandez from Alive Studios, who helps me on the ones and twos with creating this great environment to talk to you all on a weekly basis. How you doing, Chris?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. Feeling a little tired today, but I'm good nonetheless. Happy to be here.
Nice, nice. Always glad to have you as my backup. Before we get into the topics today, we're gonna do something a little bit different. Recognizing that we want more engagement from the audience tuning in. We're going to bring our actual LinkedIn feed into the show. So for those of you that are online and watching, what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to comment as I go through things, and I'll be able to answer those questions and look at them live and really um, give you more interaction. So I'm not the talking head here. So it's just a fun way for us to try to continue to innovate and push the limits, based on the feedback that our viewers have given us so far. So that being said, I want to get into our topic today. And I wanted to bring everybody back, as I do every episode, with the Design for Life model. This is the model that has helped me do the things I've been able to do. And the way that I frame the idea of life design and career design is really focusing on three big buckets: this idea of your life and what you live for, this idea of your work and what you can get paid for, and the idea of your legacy and what you leave behind for yourself in relation to and others as well. What we've talked about this during this cycle is we're talking about the elements of our work. So for the last couple of episodes, we talked about two buckets in relation to work. We talked about capital, how skills are the new currency of work in this day and age. And then we last week we talked about leverage and how you can, once you build your skills, you can start to create leverage based on your skills. And last but not least, today, we're going to talk about the topic of autonomy, which is near and dear to me, because that really, all three of these tenets bring together this idea of creating agency. And to me, autonomy is really this idea of career design 101. Like as you move toward the idea of intentionally crafting meaningful and fulfilling work in your career, it's really anchored around the idea of career design. So what I want to do to start out is really define it. And the way I define career design is this idea that you, as I mentioned, you are intentionally crafting a fulfilling and rewarding career. And it's about taking ownership in your professional life and creating paths that align to your values and goals. So if you take anything away from my definition, just to recap it, it's the idea that career design is owning your growth. And the aim in career design, as I mentioned, is autonomy. And that autonomy should be aligned to your values and goals. And with that autonomy, that gives you the freedom and flexibility to shape your work in a way that best suits you. And it's all about, creating the work environment that supports your overall growth and success. So to give you guys a snapshot, like this is an example of my journey. It's not linear, but what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how you can explore achieving autonomy and make it work for you. But I've gone through a number of different roles, from business analyst all the way to executive in a number of different industries, from marketing to professional services to healthcare, to SaaS and technology. And this, again, not a linear path, but because I invested and learned the skill of career design, I was able to move myself, through 10 or 11 different roles over a multitude of different sectors in the last 10 years. So what I wanted to talk about is, now that we understand, the importance of autonomy and how it can actually help you, I want to talk about some of the benefits that it ultimately drives. And These, in my opinion, based on my own experiences, are, my top five. When you start career designing and moving toward autonomy, the first thing is that you get a huge improvement in your satisfaction. That's one of the big ones. I would say that another one to consider is that when you start career designing, you're able to find motivation, because motivation is something that isn't always going to be driven by you. It's driven also by your environment, and the more you start career designing and working toward creating autonomy in your work, you can find things that motivate you. The next idea I wanted to share with you was the idea of increasing engagement. There's a lot of research that supports that folks are disengaged. So when you start thinking about seeking autonomy in your work, this is another way to activate engagement for yourself. And this benefit both to you and the business is the idea of innovation. When you have more autonomy, this also leads to improved creativity and innovation. And when you're given the space and independence to develop your ideas, you're more likely to come up with innovative solutions. And then last but not least is this idea of work life synergy. Autonomy helps you achieve better work life synergy. I don't say balance because I believe balance is a false dichotomy. It's an expectation that it's going to be always equal. But when you think about it in relation to creating synergy, the greater control you have over your work, you can set boundaries, you can prioritize your personal life and activities, which ultimately leads you to a more fulfilling and satisfying career. So, I've just outlined sort of five benefits of leaning into autonomy. I would love to, Chris, if you could switch and see if do we have anybody online, or are we any feedback on these comments?
Yeah, so we
Hey,
have
I see some people out here.
Cornelius, Onika here. We have Elizabeth here, and Doris Kloof from Ghana. Uh,
Nice, from Ghana. Yeah, yesterday was I believe it was Ghana's Independence Day.
oh snap!
So love that,
Congratulations. That's
Yes,
dope.
yes, big deals, 1957. So I'm sure there was lots of parties and festivities out there. You
Yeah.
know, my wife is from Ghana, so all the babies do all the things. So I appreciate everybody being online and engaging as I talk about this topic. So as we talked about autonomy, right? I mean, here's the fact of the matter. There's some real things that why I emphasize the idea of the importance of autonomy and why you should work toward it in your work. In general, people spend a lot of time working. Right now, research supports the idea that you spend anywhere between 80,000 to 125,000 hours working. If you do the math around that in relation to your lifetime, that's about 33 years. And then when you think about that, based on recent research, and I'm sure this number has possibly increased, is that from a U.S. perspective, there's 69% of folks, professionals in the U.S., feel a sense of disengagement, and that number is even higher globally. When I did this research last year, it was somewhere upwards around 80%, which is staggering. And with that said, my whole emphasis on the idea of skills, the World Economic Forum and other resources support this idea that more than half of us professionally need upskilling within the next 3 years, 2025. And with that being said, a lot of research supports the idea that even though people know they need to develop skills for what's next, that they lack the time to do it. And last but not least, this is impacting engagement, where people as a result are quitting and changing jobs. And the reason why I share this information is because people want to grow. And these are staggering numbers. When you think about you spend a third of your life working, you got to ask yourself, am I just a cog in the machine, or is work helping me toward designing a fulfilling life, an aligned life based on my values and goals? So with that in mind, one of the things I think about is I've been able to create autonomy in my work based on my career, but how does everyone else do it? How can you identify potential opportunities for autonomy in your work? So, I would say first and foremost, start with developing your growth mindset. I cannot emphasize this enough. For those of you that are not familiar with the idea of growth mindset, it's the idea that your skills and intelligence is something that can be developed. By contrast, when you have a fixed mindset, you believe that what you're capable of is inherent and that you can't develop forward. And the reason why I share this idea in relation to autonomy in your work is because a majority of people think of work as a thing to do. They don't think about creating agency or autonomy for themselves in their work. They often orient around the idea of just completing the task, clocking in and clocking out. And that's why I want to reframe that idea and encourage folks to think about like creating agency and creating autonomy, because you spend a lot of time doing the work, and you shouldn't just clock in and clock out. And when you think about ways you can grow in your current role or the kind of work that you aspire to, that will really help you go forward with designing in relation to autonomy. And this is a very, very important skill for executing autonomy in your work. The next thing that I want people to think about when identifying opportunities is really understanding your job requirements and limitations, because it's there isn't going to always be opportunity to create autonomy. But the more you understand your job requirements, you can identify tasks that are essential to the job and those that are not. And in creating more autonomy and agency for yourself, the goal here will be to determine a task that can potentially be delegated or outsourced, which in turn will free up more time for you to focus on the aspects of the job that you enjoy. And that helps with engagement, that helps with your motivation, that helps with alignment to your values and goals. The last idea of around creating opportunities and thinking about opportunities is, once you've worked on the skill of developing your mindset, and once you've really looked at the job and what you're doing and the limitations and the opportunities in relation to what you're doing, plain and simple, you have to create a plan to negotiate it, because autonomy is not a given. It is a privilege that you create access for yourself to. And one of the recommendations I have with those that I coach and work with is that you have to be able to negotiate autonomy with your supervisors, your managers, even the teams that you work on. And the way you do that is you start with very small, achievable goals, and you essentially put together a case in a way that highlights the benefits not only to you personally, but the benefits to your place of work, your company, or your team. So with this in mind, the idea of creating a plan is really being proactive and strategic. So you can create an environment for yourself that allows you to thrive and creates a win-win for you and who you work with. So before I get to the next section, I would love to see if there's any feedback or comments on this idea of creating autonomy and opportunities for how you can in your work.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we're just a tad bit behind, but we're getting
Mhm.
some shout outs here. So we got shout outs from Atlanta. Onika, I want you to could you say more about the false notion of balance? Yeah.
Nice, nice.
Doris
Happy to
Clue, she
happy to jump
said,
in on that. Go
yeah,
ahead. No, go. Keep going.
no, you're
Keep going.
good. Doris Clue, she said it was great commemoration. I'm assuming she's talking about referencing Ghana celebrations yesterday.
Yes. Yes.
And then a thank you from Nicole A. Harris.
Awesome.
Let me see if she has anything. Oh, no, just thank you for hosting. Just love, all love. Thank you,
Uh,
everybody, for all the
we will
love.
we will take all of that. So to expand a little bit more on the idea of balance, it's a great question, Onika. I appreciate it. I mean, you see in the media a lot of ideas around like, work life balance. That's what it's sold as. And the reason why I say it's a false dichotomy is because balance is associated with things being equal. And I don't know about the rest of you, but for those who are in life, in their careers, um, parents to children, mothers and sisters and aunties and cousins to different people, I feel personally that trying to make things equal is a bit of a disservice, because then as you approach things, you're trying to force function things being equal. And the reason why I reframe it toward the idea of synergy is the idea that some things have seasons and they ebb and flow. So the more you realize what season you're in and what your priorities are, the better you can load up either your skill sets, your mindsets, your routines to help you manage through that point in time. So I think about it as more of like a calibration exercise, which is why I think of synergy. And I often sort of reevaluate myself at least on a quarterly basis to see how I'm moving along in relation to those priorities. So I hope that answers your question, Onika, and I really really appreciate it, because it's a great question, and I love talking about the difference between balance and synergy with respect to that.
Yeah. I thought that was good. That's something I struggle with, like just the idea of a balance. Like I'm still, I feel like, brainwashed by the idea of like, if you love what you do, you never work a day of your life, but it's still work. You get me?
Right.
Like it could really quickly turn into work, like in a matter of seconds. So I'm still very much learning that. Like, what were you saying? Like, it's not a balance. It's a synergy.
Yes,
Yeah.
synergy. It's like how are you lining yourself up for like your busy season or your low season, and what are the things that you're doing that give you energy to continue to show up, and just calibrating,
Yeah.
and being present in those moments.
Yeah.
And that's why I emphasize the idea of delegating and figuring out what you can outsource so you can do more of the things that give you that energy to keep showing up.
Yep. I feel you there. All right.
So definitely appreciate it. So now moving back on the train, the last component I wanted to talk about around the idea of autonomy is how do you go about implementing it? Now that you started looking at the opportunities, um, it's really at the end of the day, it's about setting realistic goals. So that's why I always say you got to set smart goals for yourself. And we've talked about smart goals in other sessions, but is making sure that it's specific, measurable, realistic, and time bound. So that way, you're setting the bar low in relation to the task and the opportunities that you could perhaps delegate or outsource, so that you are focusing and creating more free time for yourself. The other thing I wanted to emphasize, which people don't often think about as you start to actually implement, is making sure you communicate effectively. It's really, really important as you journey toward this idea of autonomy in your work to maintain communication and accountability. So, in relation to your team members, your direct reports, or people you report to, it's making sure that they stay informed about your progress and that you're setting feedback regularly. And this helps you to stay on track, because autonomy in work is not a regular muscle for everyone straight away. Some folks say they want it, but then they recognize that they have to build the muscle in order to be able to handle it. And that actually leads me to that last point around making sure you ask for feedback and support regularly, because if you're negotiating this agreement and you're creating the win-win for yourself and who you work with, it's important to understand that you're going to need support and feedback, and it's a journey. So typically when I work with leaders in this context, it's coaching leaders to help them understand when it's time to uh, support people when they're trying to be a bit more autonomous. Because what happens is, with some people who are not used to being autonomous, too much autonomy can lead to disorganization. So from a leader perspective, I encourage folks to basically be a servant, to work as a coach, because it's not about taking over control, but it's about helping facilitate and providing assistance when someone gets stuck. That being said, reframing it to you all in the audience who may be more on the contributor side, if your leader's not prepared to do this, this is why I encourage you to ask for support and feedback regularly in executing your plan, because you can manage up and help facilitate these activities. Because at the end of the day, when you achieve autonomy, you're really building trust. That's what it really boils down to. If you take anything away from this conversation today around career designing and moving to this idea of autonomy in your work, it's about building trust with those that you work with. And so, I know I covered a lot of pretty high level conceptual topics around this, but before I get into recapping the key takeaways, I would just love to pop back in to the chat to see if folks had any other questions, thoughts, feedback there. Are we
I got you. Hold
looking
on real
pretty
quick.
good?
I'm just grabbing my phone real quick.
No worries. So you guys know, while Chris is doing that, we're actually, the way we show the questions is we literally have it connected to a phone and we just push it on live. So creating all the innovation where the functionality doesn't quite exist yet. So
Hey, there we go.
nice, nice.
Yeah, this is problem
So
solving 101.
right,
I literally like I have a time like limit on my apps, and LinkedIn just ran to that time limit. I was like, oh shit, Priscilla has my passcode from my from her phone like time limit to put it up, so I had to go get that.
no worries,
But we're
no
back.
worries.
We're hit. There we go.
Uh,
All right. I remember you sharing this with me a few months ago, and it completely transformed how I view work-life balance.
awesome,
From Jerica Profit.
awesome. I appreciate you, Jericho. I appreciate you checking in and knowing that the advice actually helps you out. So
Yeah.
let me see here. What do we have? Do we have any ideas on coaching a team and colleagues and peers when communication is not transparent and proactive? I know we live in a reactionary world, but communication concept is big. Oh man, Marissa, it's Marissa, right? I can't see. Yes, it is.
Yeah, Marissa Eswell,
Um,
yeah.
thank you so much, Marissa. It's such a powerful point to unpack the idea of why effective communication matters. It matters in so many facets. And what I would say, and what I would advise in thinking about that logic, is why I talk to people on a one-to-one basis, is it starts from within you. I definitely believe that, yes, it's great when there are top-down approaches and practices that help us, but really the bottom-up ownership around, how do I communicate in alignment to my values and goals? That really helps build the muscles needed in order to facilitate effective communication and start to change those paradigms. So when I think about it from a leader perspective, as I imagine you're in that seat, is I try to create those safe spaces, as a leader within my teams. So I may not be able to impact the macro environment initially, but by working with my team and creating those safe spaces to communicate effectively and to build the muscles around those skills, it allows us to set example, and then that example can then influence broader change. So it's like a slow boil to start to institute good practices. I'll give you a quick example before we wrap up. For example, in our workflows, one of the things we do is we recognize that our meetings would always run over. So instead of people showing up late to meetings, we were trying to institute a practice of making sure we put all of our calendar invites to start at 5 past the hour. And this wasn't something that was asked of leadership or mandated, but recognizing the problem space, we collectively came up with the idea to make that adjustment. And as a result, other teams started following suit, because it's appreciated to have those breaking moments between meetings so that you could have a bio break or reorient yourself so you can show up and be present and cover the ground you want to cover in your meetings. So a very small example, but just to illustrate how knowing what your problem space is and working with your team in a direct way can improve building those muscles to communicate effectively.
Good stuff. I felt like that was a solid response to that question.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. So let's wrap things up. Let's bring this idea home. So, we covered a lot of topics. So I just want you to kind of take away these big ideas from what we talked about in relation to autonomy today. And it's the first idea is that your career design is owning your growth. If you remember anything about the idea of career design, owning your growth, even though companies will help facilitate that, you own it, and that's agnostic of where you work or who you work for. The next idea is just reorienting around the benefits of moving toward career design and this idea of autonomy. I mentioned five, but if you take away anything, when you start becoming more autonomous in your work, it improves satisfaction and it improves engagement and it improves opportunity for you to create more synergy, which we elaborated on more in today's session. When you're looking for opportunities, the takeaways here are, remember, growth mindset. Think about your mindset first, because not everybody's ready to be autonomous. So when you start developing your mindset, this sets you up for success. And then look at the requirements in the work you're doing or the job and role you may have to see where there are opportunities to potentially delegate and outsource so you can create more time in doing work aligned to your values. And then last but not least, in relation to that, plan, because autonomy is not given. So you have to be in a position to be able to negotiate it and articulate that value to either your team members or to your leaders and managers. And then implementing, as I mentioned, make sure your goals are smart. Really double click and emphasize on the idea of communication to the example that we elaborated on, and seek feedback. If you're lucky enough to have a leader that often gives feedback, that's great. But even if you don't, when you think about moving toward the world of being a bit more autonomous in your work, put that into the cycles, because that at the end of the day leads to the last point where you're over communicating and you're moving toward autonomy and you're building trust, because that is the anchor of the idea of having autonomy in your work, is that people trust your ideas. And that's why I wanted to bring you back to this slide in the framework, because your work starts with your skills. And if you have your skills, those skills can become currency because you're able to show them and articulate them. Then you use those skills to create leverage to do more of what you want to do and less of what you don't want to do. And in doing that, you build your expertise and you build relationships, and your skills become assets. And with those assets in place, you can then move down this road of autonomy, where you have freedom in your work and you have built trust in what you do. And that leads you to equaling this holistic idea of agency. So when you are designing your best work and life in relation to this component of work, the goal is agency. And over the last 3 weeks, we've covered, the three areas that I like to focus on to help you achieve that: your capital, your leverage, and your autonomy.
Whew.
So
That deserves a you hit that one. That was, you flowed on that. If I can cut that and make a clip out of that without any edits. Like that was
no
beautiful.
edits. Nice,
No
nice.
edits. That was a one take Drake right there.
I appreciate you, Chris, and I appreciate everyone who has listened in today. If you want to have conversations, feel free to reach out to me. Again, this is Kason Morris. This is Kason Morris Learnings, and next week we're going to invite a special guest on who has their own story around how they've gone about, designing and crafting their work to create their best life. So really, really super excited about that. And I will share it in my social channels. More to come. Chris from Alive Studios, thank you again for helping with the production, for continuing to elevate this show. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Awesome. Bye everybody. Take care.
Ciao.